Hello, boys and girls. This is Miss Voelker. I hate if you not to get to finish up the story that we started in the classroom, Helen Keller's teacher. Today we're going to start with a chapter called Water. If you remember, um, she spent the time alone, Helen and Miss Annie did together in the house, and she didn't have quite enough time, but Dad said no more. She's coming back. So I'm going to pick up from where we left here. They're going back to the main house. I'll read about 10 minutes and see how far we get. One morning, soon after their return to the big house, Helen and Annie were sitting side by side on the bedroom floor. Annie had Helen's hand imprisoned in hers, spelling more shapes into it. M-U-G, she spelled. Then she guided Helen's hand over her own breakfast mug. M-U-G. Helen shaped back obediently. M-U-G. M-U-G. But her heart wasn't in it, not today. This weary game of shapes was fast losing interest for her. The smell of spring were pouring in through the open window. She tugged at Annie's sleeve. Clearly, she was asking to go outside. Not yet, Helen, Annie spelled. Just a few more minutes. Then the lessons will be over and we can go outside. Helen felt the strange shapes of Annie's speech being formed in her palm, but she still didn't know that the shapes were words and that they had meaning. It was this that the building up was the frustration in her, for there was a dim awareness inside her. The stranger wanted something from her, something she simply didn't know how to give. And besides, those smells, the outdoors was calling too strongly. Helen jerked away again at Annie's arm, much harder this time. Oh, no, Annie exclaimed as she saw the telltale signs of a temper rising. I'm simply not equipped to handle this early in the morning, so come on. Annie led Helen outside. As soon as Helen felt the sun on her face, she began to skip and dance. She was getting her own way, and the lesson must be over. The two of them rambled through the middle of the garden, Annie letting Helen stop whenever she wanted to smell the flowers or roll in the grass. It seemed for all the world as if they were out for a casual stroll, but stubborn Annie still intended to salvage something from the morning. She led Helen down the old well house that stood at the front of the garden. Helen loved to play in the cool dampness, so she scurried cheerfully inside. Annie took a deep breath and followed. She began to bang the pump handle up and down, and soon a stream of water poured from its lip. She grabbed Helen's hand and stuck it underneath the icy flow. In the same instant, began to spell Water into the wet palm. Helen went rigid and pulled wildly towards freedom, but Annie held on. Water. Water. She drummed the word faster and faster into Helen's hand. Suddenly, Helen stopped struggling or breathing or doing anything except concentrate on the shapes in her palm. Water. She felt the word burn down through her hand and into her brain. Water. A light flooded across her face. She began to spell the word back to Annie, and with each movement of her own fingers, the namelessness retreated. She understood. Those movements stood for the cold liquid that was pouring over her hand. They always stood for that and nothing else. She finally understood. Life came rushing in on Helen. Now she dropped to the ground and struck it with her fists, laughing, crying. Annie knelt down and hugged her, but Helen had no time for this. She pushed Annie back and struck against the ground. Name it, she was demanding, and Annie did. Helen paused for a moment to absorb the shapes. Then she wheeled around and hit the pump. P-U-M-P. Annie fluttered off on her fingers. Helen stood on one leg, concentrating on this, her third word as many minutes. With a short nod, she added it to her growing pile. Then, with ever-increasing speed, she whirled around and around the well house, demanding the names of everything she touched. After 6 or 7 more words, she stopped. She cocked her head, and it was clear to Annie that she was puzzled. There was something she wanted to know. Helen frowned as if she was heading into another rage, but she wasn't. It was an effort of shaping through without words. Now she took her fist and banged herself on top of the head. Annie burst out laughing. So that's it, she exclaimed. Come, rascal, give me your hand. Hellen. She spelled slowly into it. It didn't seem possible, but the light grew brighter in Helen's eyes. She stood very still for a moment with her face raised towards Annie. She had a name. Now she took Annie's hand and very gently patted her on the arm. Annie thought she was saying thank you, but Helen wanted something more. She patted Annie's arm again. Oh, said Annie, as she knelt down beside Helen and spelled Teacher into her hand. Now the two of them had names. Teacher. So it happened that a few minutes later, two entirely new people walked out of the house. The well house. Teacher had come to the stranger's place. Phantom was gone. Instead, there was Helen. Full of the joy of understanding, Helen continued to reach out for Teacher, begging for new words. Before bedtime that evening, Helen had learned to spell more than 30 words. More words in one day than she'd learned in 5 weeks since Annie had come. And she knew their meanings, too. Now her fingers were trembling with exhaustion. She fumbled the shapes and her eyelids drooped. Enough's enough, Annie thought as she tucked her in bed as they shared. Helen settled down happily, but Annie had to laugh. As she watched her hands, there would be time for this tomorrow, Helen. There was nothing of tomorrow now. She reached down to quiet the fingers which were still moving against the sheets. Annie stood beside the bed, realizing for the first time that day just how tired she was. Quickly, she slid into her nightgown and climbed into bed beside Helen. No face washing or teeth brushing tonight. The end of a wonderful day, she thought, and wriggling her toes against the cool sheets. But the day wasn't quite over, for Helen was still awake, and now she came stealing over to Annie's side of the bed. After dropping a damp kiss onto Annie's cheek, she snuggled down to the crook of her arm and fell asleep. Annie lay there holding the sleeping child. Then she bent down and kissed Helen back. Okay. Thank you so much for enjoying the story with me, and I'll be back another day to read some more. Thank you. Have a great day, kids. Bye.